This week, a hacker finds an Instagram account takeover flaw worth $10,000. A judge orders the Capital One hacker Paige Thompson to remain in prison. A vast majority of newly registered domains are in fact malicious, and why half of all social media logins are fraud. In expert commentary, Jason Wood joins us to discuss building your first incident response policy, a practical guide for beginners. All that and more on this episode of Hack Naked News.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show that brings you the security news each week. And despite popular belief, we do wear pants. It's Hack Naked News. Let the team at Black Hills Information Security test your defenses. With over 10 years of experience in penetration testing, red teaming, and threat hunting, the testers at Black Hills will help you find the holes in your security before the bad guys do. The team at Black Hills cares about educating and sharing their knowledge by creating countless blogs, open source tools, and webcasts for you to learn more about the tradecraft of pen testing and red teaming. Visit securityweekly.com/BHIS to join their mailing list and view the latest blogs and webcasts from Black Hills Information Security. Too many alerts and not enough action? It's time to get SaltStack. SaltStack is an intelligent IT automation platform that detects security issues in critical business systems and then actually fixes them. With SaltStack, security and IT teams work together to define custom security policies with certified checks for CIS, DISA-STIGs, and more. You can scan systems for millions of compliance checks in minutes. Remediate compliance and vulnerability issues with powerful automation, all in a single platform. Visit securityweekly.com/SaltStack to learn more. Welcome, everyone, to Hack Naked News, episode number 231 for August 27th, 2019. I'm your host, Paul Asadorian. We have exciting news about our webcast program here at Security Weekly. We're partnering with ISC Squared as an official CPE provider. If you attend any of our webcasts, you'll be receiving 1 CPE credit per webcast. Register for our upcoming webcast with Zane Lackey of Signal Sciences, Ian McShane from Endgame, or Stephen Smith and Jeff Brosher from Logarithm. It's going to be awesome. securityweekly.com/webcasts. And you can check out the on-demand library archive at securityweekly.com/on-demand. And now, the news for this week. A hacker finds an Instagram account takeover flaw. He was paid $10,000. India-based white hat hacker Laxman Muthia identified the flaw while looking at Instagram's password system for mobile devices and password recovery, a process which users receive a 6-digit code on their phone and have to enter it within 10 minutes to be allowed to change their password. Instagram developers have implemented some protection mechanisms to prevent attempts to obtain the code through brute force attacks even. However, according to Muthia, an ID is randomly generated by the Instagram app for every device included in the request when the password reset code is solicited. The device ID is also used to check the validity of the 6-digit code, and he essentially came up with a way to brute force that ID, given there were some commonalities. The full write-up is available, and I suggest you go read it because it's more than I can describe here in 30 seconds. Code execution flaw in QEMU mostly impacts development and test VMs, according to the project. The security hole, described as a heap-based buffer overflow that can lead to a virtual machine escape, is related to Slurp, an old tool that can be used to emulate PPP slip and C-slip connections via a shell account. According to Wikipedia, Slurp is still useful for connecting to mobile devices via their serial ports and for firewall piercing and port forwarding. However, QEMU developer Stefan Hajanozi, I think I said that right, clarified that the production VMs typically do not use Slurp, and CVE 2019-14378 mainly impacts users who run QEMU manually for development and testing purposes. Or do they? How does he really know that for sure? I mean, it seems like speculation, which we do a lot of here. In any case, in the bizarre story this week, judge has ordered Capital One hacker Paige Thompson to remain in prison. It just seems the story gets more
bizarre. Every time I read it, it's just a bizarre series of events. A U.S. judge has ordered Capital One hacker Paige Thompson to remain in custody pending trial because her bizarre and erratic behavior makes the woman at risk. The judge argued that she is a flight risk and poses a physical danger to herself and others. Now, he doesn't say this because he's trying to be mean. He's saying this based on evidence, as what I believe a good judge should do, right? The judge is quoted saying, in today's America, it's easy enough to obtain firearms, and there's every reason to be concerned that Thompson, who has repeatedly threatened to kill, would obtain a means to carry out her threats, particularly when confronted with the alternative of near certain conviction and imprisonment. Oh, sorry, that was the prosecutor who said that. The judge wouldn't say something like that, right? Prosecutor said that in their motion to keep Paige Thompson in custody. Of course, in July, Capital One, one of the largest card issuers and financial corporations, suffered a data breach that exposed personal information from 106 million Capital One credit applications. Paige Thompson goes online, ironically enough, with the handle erratic, breached those systems at Capital One and gained access to a huge trove of personal information. Law enforcement identified and arrested her. The judge believes that Thompson should remain detained for the time being, as the woman had already attempted to commit suicide by cop, as quoted from the article. Threat list: half of all social media logins are fraud. The extremely high attack rate on social media logins is indicative of the value placed on data fraudsters extract from compromised social media accounts, according to Kevin Goschalk, CEO of Arcos, in a media statement. He says, because more than 50% of social media logins are fraud, we know the fraudsters are using large-scale bots to launch attacks on social media platforms with the goal of disseminating spam, stealing information, spreading social media propaganda, and executing social engineering campaigns targeting trusting consumers. Basically covering the news, I'd buy that. From an overall digital fraud perspective, Arcos, this is where they got the data, examined more than 1.2 billion transactions spanning account registrations, logins, and payments from financial services, e-commerce, travel, social media, gaming, and entertainment industries, and found that 1 in 10 transactions overall are malicious, ranging from automated bots to humans carrying out scams. The internet is, in fact, a wretched hive of scum and villainy. Hackers are actively trying to steal passwords from 2 widely used VPNs. The vulnerabilities can be exploited by sending unpatched web requests that contain a specially crafted sequence of characters, of course. The researchers presented this information at Black Hat in Las Vegas this summer. The pre-authorization file reading vulnerabilities on the FortiGate SSL VPN installed on about 480,000 servers and competing Pulse Secure VPN, SSL VPN installed on 50,000 machines are vulnerable. The DevCore researchers discovered other critical vulnerabilities in both products. These make it possible for attackers to, among other things, remotely execute malicious code and change passwords. Patches for the FortiGate VPN became available in May and April for Pulse Secure. May and then April for Pulse Secure, but installing the patches can often cause service disruptions, go figure, that prevent businesses from carrying out essential attacks. Internet scans performed over the weekend by Security Intelligence Service Bad Packets show there are 14,528 Pulse Secure VPN endpoints available to flaws that currently being exploited, up from a previous scan that found 2,658 unpatched servers. A business forked out $115,000 to basically present at Black Hat. Now they are suing the organizers of Black Hat UBM because they were heckled. I think there's a fine line between maybe heckling and constructive feedback. However, the fact we're covering this in news shines a light on whatever may have transpired, and I have not looked into all the details. But according to the article, a small group of detractors used the stage and event to initiate a smear campaign on social media during the conference and immediately after. There is a formal lawsuit that has been filed. In that campaign, they say these
Detractors defamed Crown Sterling, who was the presenter, questioning both its integrity and its cryptography solutions, which they described in one publication as snake oil crypto. In the phone interview with the registered Dan Guido, CEO of the InfoSec business Trail of Bits, who attended the Black Hat presentation, baracked the presentation and was removed by the room by conference security, argued that Crown Sterling was trying to mix mysticism and magic into science and that none of it made any sense. I do think it's healthy for us in the community to point those things out. Of course, Crown Sterling's not very happy about that, but, I mean, there's two sides to every story. Apple released an emergency patch to address the CVE 2019-8605. As you probably know from the CVE number, you recognize that, right? Yeah, that's the one that allows a jailbreak in iOS 12.4 because they accidentally unpatched the vulnerability that they had already fixed, making current versions of iOS vulnerable to hackers, allowing the jailbreaking of devices. Experts discovered that version 12.4, released in June, had reintroduced a security flaw that was found by Google Project Zero. And was fixed in a previous release in 12.3. Of course, jailbreakers now are urging folks to stay on 12.4 if you want to be able to jailbreak your device, if you're into that kind of thing, I guess. And so there's a lot more information about version numbers and such, but essentially Apple's fixed it. GitHub joins WebAuthn. This is great news, as WebAuthn supersedes U2F and offers everything the older standard did, with some additional benefits, of course. It upgrades GitHub's two-factor authentication to support the industry standard put forth by the World Wide Web Consortium, which oversees many of the standards on the web, making it an official standard in March 2019. And while you can use third-party hardware, a security key with WebAuthn, in many cases you don't need to. You can use your digital key stored in your phone, turning your phone essentially into a hardware key. WebAuthn can be the primary access factor. In fact, we had someone here in an expert commentary segment at some point this year, I don't have the episode number, talking about WebAuthn. U2F still needed a password, whereas WebAuthn does not. So you could essentially replace your passwords when you're accessing GitHub, which is kind of cool. Good for them for supporting the latest in the standards. A vast majority of newly registered domains are, in fact, malicious. The NRDs, or newly registered domains, are an interesting breed, with some staying active for a very brief period, just hours, while others are quickly spotted behaving as command and control servers or distributing malware, phishing attacks, or used for typo squatting. For the most part, NRDs are registered under the .com TLD, but those registered in a country code extension tend to be malicious in nature. According to Palo Alto, whose research found that NRDs registered to the .to, or Tongo, and .di, Kiribati, had the highest rate of nasty domains, with more than 90% in each case being considered malicious or at least suspicious. The top 15 TLDs with the highest malicious NRD rating are published in their report. Because there's such a high number of them, Palo Alto recommends combating the problem using, well, URL filtering, of course. We'll take a short break and come back for expert commentary with Jason Wood. Stay tuned. The question is simple. Have any of the systems on my network been compromised? The answer is harder than it should be. Enter AI Hunter. Active Countermeasures has automated and streamlined techniques used by the best pen testers and threat hunters in the industry to create AI Hunter, a network threat hunting solution that does the first pass of a hunt for you to identify systems that are most likely to be compromised and scores the results on a scale from 0 to 100. You can then research those systems in depth with AI Hunter. Focus your valuable time on the systems that need your expertise with AI Hunter. Sign up for a personal demo today at securityweekly.com/ACM. Welcome back, everyone, to Hack Naked News. We're, of course, here with Jason Wood from Paladin Security, talk about building your first incident response policy. It sounds fun and somewhat painful, sort of.
It does. It doesn't sound, building a policy or anything like this is not a whole lot of fun, but
well, and it's also, Jason froze there for a moment, it's less fun if you don't have a policy in the first place. Then incident response is pretty much a hot mess and a lot less fun. I think you're back now, Jason.
Yeah, that was pretty... Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Boy, that was weird. All right. So, yeah. I thought this article was interesting, just as a quick, brief little write-up on getting started writing your own IR plan. And part of me had the reaction of, gee, I mean, we've got reports of entire cities being taken down, as we've covered last week, due to ransomware and things like that. You would think IR plans would be pretty well established at this point, that they're necessary for every organization. However, probably like many of you, I've experienced organizations that tend to skip out on that little step because they don't think it can happen to them, or they don't want to face the idea that it can happen to them, or they just have too many other things on their mind. And you, as the security person, if you were working at such a company, probably feeling a little uncomfortable about that. So I thought maybe we could just talk about some basics of a response plan. Because like I said, having had a couple incidents early on in my career where the company was not prepared, I can tell you it was a very long, painful experience. There are always a few components we want to make sure that we have in any IR plan. Some of them are non-technical in nature, which tends to get avoided by us, folks who like looking at packets and things like that. But you need to have some questions to be answered, such as who's going to be in charge of this thing, how's the communication going to flow. Last thing you want to be is in the middle of an incident and have a sysadmin start talking on Twitter or something like that about what's going on. So how do things get reported up to the organization? Who's the person that's responsible for declaring an incident, and who should be involved in responding to it? And that's both technical and non-technical representatives from the organization. Now, these seem to have some obvious answers as you think about it at first, but the opinions can definitely vary wildly within an organization, especially when a system owner realizes that if there's an incident, there is a chance their system, their application will be taken offline for some period of time. And all of a sudden, they don't want to have that happen, and they start looking for ways to delay or push that back. You also have all the technical concerns that need to be taken care of. And this is where we're going to get our hands on the keyboard and actually start doing things to contain and remove the incident, monitor for the attacker coming back in or trying again. But some of the things you need to do is you need to make sure that you have the software and the tools on hand before this starts happening. The last thing you want to do is be running down to Best Buy to go buy a bunch of hard drives in the middle of fighting a fire. Actually, a number of years ago, I wrote a blog post on this topic, which I toss a link here in the show notes. It's a little dated in some areas, but it gives you some basics on some things to consider that you should have on hand, always ready to go for any kind of basic incident. And and you want to make sure you're familiar with those tools, with the software that you're going to be using. If you need to image a hard drive, this is not the time to learn how to use the DD command and discover the perils of mixing up the input file versus the output file, for example.
Sounds like you speak from experience, Jason.
I have not done that one, but I have heard of that happening, and I have come close where you're typing things out and you realize, oh crud, that's the wrong one. Yep. Backspace. Write blockers are your friends in that case, because even if you typo it,
right,
you're safe. And they're not that expensive. You also want to consider having some, we get used to the idea of using built-in OS commands, but, if the system's been compromised, there's a chance that the system's lying to you. So you have tools ready for that. One thing that I like to bring up whenever I talk to folks about IR are tabletop exercises. Now, the first time I heard of doing a tabletop exercise, I thought it was utterly absurd. You're going to talk your way through the problem. How is this going to work? It just seemed to be too much of an opportunity to game it, to come up with a result where everything is happy and successful, and we basically just went through a wasted several hours or something, going through this. But I think it done right, a tabletop exercise can be very valuable, particularly if you get in the folks who are not normally dealing with this type of thing. The business owners, or not the business owners, the application owners in particular, need to be involved in incident response, because we may, again, look at it and say, hey, we need to take these systems down, and that's going to take your app offline. And they need to be prepared for that. They need to understand why we're doing that. And a tabletop exercise makes that a safe environment to do that in, to talk about it, and to make a decision without them being worried about losing their job immediately over it or taking some kind of blame. If they're not prepared, then, well, generally, if people aren't prepared, they're going to push back on making decisions. They're going to defer to somebody else and try and get them to make that decision, and that's going to freeze things up during an incident. So, highly recommend looking at doing tabletop exercises. I don't know where Black Hills got the idea of this, but I really like it. They use things where if a situation is coming up that we need to make a decision on, the folks in the tabletop exercise give what they decide they're going to do. And Black Hills came up with the idea of just rolling a Dungeons and Dragons D20 to see, they're not as succeeds. And you get bonuses for things like, hey, we got to do forensics on this system, file system forensics. Sam over here is trained in that. Fabulous. That gives you a +5 to succeed, or a negative if, we don't have any forensic software anywhere, so we would have to figure out how to do that. The nice thing about that is nobody turns around to you or whoever's running the tabletop exercise and says, well, you're just trying to throw us under the bus with that and game the system for the result that you want. We can just toss it out there with a dice. So I think that's pretty cool. I really like how they did that. And, add some randomness to the whole exercise. Obviously, IR is a huge topic to be covered, and, we're only talking about it for a few minutes here. The main point, I think, of this is you need to be prepared for this ahead of time. The last thing you want is to be in the middle of a complete incident and be in the situation of trying to figure out who's in charge, who's going to be coordinating things, who are the people that need to be involved in this, because it's going to be bigger than the security team, and who has the authority to make certain decisions, and what equipment we have on hand. It takes that bad situation and just turns it into a complete disaster if it's being done under the gun. So I think the main point here is take some time and do some preparations for this. Take a look at the article here. It gives you some ideas for where to start out. And if you're at an organization that isn't interested in doing an IR plan, but you're feeling the need for it, start to work on sketching something out. Put together a rough plan and write something up, and then go ahead and send it over to your boss and say, hey, here's what I was thinking about we could do in this situation. And the nice thing about writing it up and sending it an email is if something happens, you're the person with the plan at that point, and nobody turns around and looks at you and says, why didn't you even think about this in the first place? You can say, look, I did. Here it is. It's documented. So it's a way of protecting yourself a little bit as well, and can help your career, a little bit, help you in your career as you are trying to maybe get into a security position or get some things done inside of your organization. And it gives your plan a pretty good shot of being implemented. So take a look. Definitely worth your time.
Outstanding. Jason, thank you so much for appearing on this episode of Hack Naked News. Thank you, everyone, for listening and watching. See you next time.